Universal Studios Hollywood is the original Universal theme park, opening in 1964 with the Universal Studio Tour. Since then, the park has expanded to include 13 attractions, with the 14th, the Fast and Furious roller coaster, opening in 2026. The park sits on an interesting plot of land, located on the side of a hill overlooking Los Angeles. It's also located right next door to an actual working movie studio, which makes this park incredibly unique. In this video, I'll be ranking every attraction found at this park from worst to best. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like this video and subscribe to catch future theme park rankings. All that said, let's get this list started with number 13, Silly Swirly. Yes, I did actually go on this ride. You can already tell by looking at it that this ride is nothing special, but I will say there's one element I wasn't expecting. This Minions Land is built on top of a parking garage, with cutouts blocking the view from the ground level. Most of the time, you can't see anything down below, but on Silly Swirly, you're just about able to peek over the edge. While there are plenty of other vantage points in the park, it's still pretty unique for a ride that's otherwise just a simple Dumbo clone. It's still deserving of last place, but this land did give us the freeway minion, so who's to say really? Number 12, Flight of the Hippogriff. This is yet another kid-friendly ride that looks just about as good as you'd expect. The coaster itself is fine enough, as is the theming, but there's nothing for me that pushes this ride beyond mediocrity. There is a cool animatronic near the start, but that's honestly about it. It's a fine offering for families visiting the park, but even then, there's plenty of better kids rides I'll get into as we get deeper into the video. If you're bored, this is far from a bad ride, but it's certainly one of the weaker ones at the park. Number 11, DreamWorks Theater featuring Kung Fu Panda. Yes, that's really the name of this ride. It's a bit of a confusing concept, with the theater itself supposedly being a sort of meeting place for all the DreamWorks characters. There's a pretty fun pre-show here where all the characters interact with each other, eventually leading to Poe setting off on a new adventure. However, that's where my confusion lies with this attraction. You would think the idea of a theater featuring all the DreamWorks characters would have a show that focuses on more than just one of them. At the very least, you'd think that the show would be switched out every once in a while to feature a new storyline. However, the only film that's ever been shown in this theater in the 6 years it's been open is this Kung Fu Panda one. When it comes to the ride itself, it's fine, I guess. The film is decent enough, but as a ride, it doesn't really do anything. If you've ever been to a 4D theater where the seats move around a bit, you know what to expect. Beyond that though, there's not a whole lot that this ride actually does. The screen does expand at some point, which is kind of cool, but in terms of actual 4D effects, there's nothing to really see here. My personal favorite screen-based show, Muppet Vision 3D, has a ton of effects outside of the screen to immerse guests in the experience. There's animatronics, water effects, lighting, smoke, and so much more to bring the show to life. This Kung Fu Panda show has nothing like that. If the show at least changed every once in a while, the simplicity may be a bit more excusable. As it stands though, I think it would be better if this were replaced with something a bit more involved. Number 10, Despicable Me Minion Mayhem. This ride is a step up from the DreamWorks Theater, purely because it feels like an actual ride. It's another attraction where you're staring at a screen, but unlike DreamWorks Theater, the ride vehicle manages to actually simulate motion rather than just moving up and down a bit. The pre-show and ride itself have a decent story, although I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of this franchise. Regardless, I think it works fairly well for a simulator ride, with guests being turned into a minion and thrown into this crazy world. I've been on plenty of better and more immersive simulators, but for what this ride is going for, I think it's perfectly decent. Number 9, The Simpsons Ride. This is yet another ride where you sit around looking at a screen, but I do think it's the best of the three we've discussed so far. The ride itself is surprisingly intense, which is both an upside and a downside. While it does make the ride feel more like, well, a ride, it does also tend to give people motion sickness. I think part of the reason this happens is because the motion is slightly out of sync from the video. Admittedly though, motion sickness rarely affects me, so my ranking may differ from yours here. While I'm not a fan of most simulators to begin with, the one part of this ride I really enjoy is the humor. Even after this ride closes for good, I think the script will stay with me for years to come. Other than that, the queue is pretty weak, but there are some 4D effects on the ride that help improve the experience. It's not one of the standout rides at this park, but it's worth checking out as long as you know you won't get sick. It likely won't be around much longer either, so it's worth a shot at the very least. Number 8, Transformers The Ride 3D. I have to be completely honest here and say that my opinion of this ride is impacted by the existence of Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure. Both of these attractions use the same ride system, and to me, the original ride there is far superior to this weaker version here. I'll admit there are some improvements. The visuals on this ride are incredibly sharp, and some of the screens seem truly massive, completely engulfing your field of vision. I also feel like the motion is a bit more intense here, although I'm not sure if that's just me imagining things. Despite all that, for me, the world this ride builds is completely uninteresting. The color scheme is gray and dull, and the realistic city theming is much less fun compared to the world of Spider-Man. The writing is just as dull, with the script boiling down to Evac yelling the name of Transformers when they appear on screen. Worse yet, many of the special effects are dumbed down here, removing the fire effect and replacing it with some colored steam. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad ride by any means. The mix of screens and physical theming is still pretty solid, and the ride vehicle is one of the best out there. Regardless, I feel as though I've been spoiled by just how good Spider-Man is. Even putting aside that comparison, I don't think this ride quite stacks up to the next few on this list. While it's a solid ride in concept, it's not quite as good in execution. Number 7. Waterworld. I don't usually count live stage shows on these lists, but for this video I wanted to make an exception. Waterworld is the only real show at this park, and it's a very strange one at that. If you didn't already know, this show is based on a 1995 movie by the same name, which was a decent success at the time but isn't really talked about now. That makes the story a bit confusing, since it seems to be assuming you've watched the movie beforehand. The world building is very strange as a result, but I have to admit the aesthetic kind of rocks. The stage is a fort built out of scrap metal, with custom boats driving around and even a huge plane crashing through the set. There's some incredible stunts pulled off here, although I will admit the show can occasionally feel a bit empty. Sometimes there's just a few people climbing on the rafters, with not much else going on. Other than that, this is a pretty solid show, and one of the best Universal has on offer. It doesn't quite hit the top half of this list, but I do understand why people like it. Number 6. Revenge of the Mummy. Okay, look. If you've been to the Orlando parks, you may be wondering why this ranks so low on this list. Even if you've just been to Hollywood, you may be wondering the same thing. To explain all that, I need to go on a bit of a rant. Just hear me out here. On Florida's version of the ride, you're meant to be stepping onto the set where they're shooting the mummy, rather than just being in the mummy. That extra layer of depth may make the story a little confusing, but it adds plenty of fourth wall breaking and comedic elements. At the same time, it didn't necessarily need to be there. The outside sort of looks like a museum, so you could get away with just having this be the real mummy. That's where my problem with Hollywood's version of the ride comes up. This version of the ride is very clearly built inside a soundstage. There's some elements of theming on the outside, but it really doesn't disguise the fact that this is not an actual archaeological dig. So that begs the question, why in the world is this version of the ride trying to convince you it's real? Unlike Florida's version, there's no added story element of this being a film set. You're meant to be actually setting foot within the mummy's tomb. But again, you can clearly see this is a mostly unthemed soundstage. So why didn't they just make it a film set here too? Or honestly, you could have just switched it around. Have the Orlando version be real and have the Hollywood version be a film set. It's even more dumbfounding to me because it's not like this is the original version of the ride either. This version opened a month after Orlando's version, which is even more confusing since it removes several of the best elements of that ride. There's no fake out ending or cup of coffee rant, which makes the ride feel about a minute shorter as a result. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still a solid ride and everything. It's thrilling and spooky and still a ton of fun. It just dumbfounds me that they try to make this version realistic instead of leaning into the filmmaking aspect. The interior queue is much more fitting for the theme, as is the ride itself. It's just that exterior that makes me question the choices made here. For me, the version in Orlando is far superior. That doesn't make this version bad, but it does make it feel a bit lifeless in comparison. Number 5. Secret Life of Pets Off the Leash. Universal tends to struggle when it comes to family-friendly dark rides. Here though, I'm happy to say that they have truly excelled. It's brought to life beautifully through the use of animatronics and physical set pieces. Those animatronics aren't the most complex out there, but the pure amount of them makes for a ride with plenty of stuff to look at. There's also some subtle uses of lighting and screens to make the ride really pop. The ending might rely a bit too heavily on those screens, but otherwise I think this ride strikes a good balance. The queue is also one of the best out there, making it seem like you're really walking through an actual apartment complex. Tables and sofas work to create barriers throughout the line, and there are even some animatronics scattered around the queue. All that said, while I'll admit the ride isn't the most advanced thing out there, it achieves what it set out to do almost flawlessly. It's the closest I've seen Universal get to one of Disney's classic dark rides, and one of the best attractions you can find at this resort. Number 4. Jurassic World the Ride. This is meant to be an upgraded version of the original Jurassic Park River Adventure, and in some ways I'd say it is. The animatronics are a huge improvement over the original, with the movement feeling much less stilted and janky. The ending might be the clearest example of that, with two huge dinosaur animatronics towering above you. As a water ride, I think it's an improvement as well. There's water coming at you throughout the ride, rather than just the huge splash near the end. However, the one big downgrade with this version is at the beginning. There's a long stretch at the start where you're just looking around at a massive screen, which feels much less impressive and beautiful than the original start of the ride. Despite that, I do still think this is a superior version of this attraction. Even though the beginning isn't great, the rest of the ride is nearly perfect. The transition from relaxing boat ride to essentially just a horror movie is so much fun. In spite of its weaknesses, this is still a fantastic ride and one you have to check out if you visit this park. Number 3. Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. If you've been on any version of this ride found around the world, you pretty much know what to expect here. Forbidden Journey is one of the most important and innovative dark rides ever created. It revolutionized the theme park industry and created an experience that feels like something truly special. The ride system is incredibly unique and the theming is completely immersive. My one gripe with this ride is and will always be the use of screens. These simulated portions really take you out of what's otherwise a very densely themed dark ride. Without those sections, this may just be a perfect ride, but unfortunately it's not quite there for me. Number 2. The world famous Studio Tour. This is the ride that started it all, and the ride that makes this park what it is. The Studio Tour is an hour-long tram ride taking you through an actual working film studio. You'll pass by sound stages, go through film sets old and new, and experience several different attractions along the way. As a film fan, the idea of this ride was really exciting to me. There were some very cool sets we were able to spot, like the town from The Good Place and even the iconic Bates Motel. I'll admit it doesn't feel quite as real as the nearby Warner Bros. Studio Tour, but what sets this apart from that one is the ride experiences throughout the attraction. If you've been to the Orlando parks, you're probably familiar with the Kong and Fast and Furious segments found on this ride. Those Florida rides are cloned and expanded versions of the simulated portions found on this ride. These two sections are among the weaker points of this ride, but where it really shines are the more practical ride experiences. There's an incredible simulated earthquake sequence that I was delighted to see here, since the Florida version was removed a couple years ago. The flash flood sequence was equally as cool, as was the close encounter with Jaws himself. There are some weaker moments that take away from the ride a bit. As much as I love Nope, the part where you stop in the set and watch some lights flicker a bit was more awkward than cool. There's also a section where you hop off the tram and take some photos for a bit, which was an immediate skip for me. Despite all those weaknesses I discussed, there's no denying that there's no other theme park with something like this. An hour-long ride through an actual movie studio with several rides within the ride itself. While it can be hit or miss, I find the hits mostly overpower the misses, making for a unique and awesome ride that I'd love to do again. Not to mention, it seems to change over the years, so next time you visit it may be something completely different. It's far from perfect, but it's something that you can't find anywhere else. Number 1. Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge. Okay, I have to admit my bias here. I've been a Mario fan ever since I was a kid. In fact, if you haven't noticed already, part of my username is shockingly close to a certain popular video game character. Seeing Super Nintendo World in person and riding this ride myself was one of the main reasons I wanted to visit this park at all. Despite that bias, I do genuinely believe this is an incredible ride. Even before getting on the ride itself, the queue alone is worth the price of admission. It's one of the most detailed queues I've ever been through, taking you through a slew of different environments on your journey into Bowser's Castle. In my opinion, it's the best ride queue that Universal has ever done, and nearly tops my list of the best ride queues of all time, which I should probably just do a video on at this point. Rambling aside, that great theming doesn't end when you're on the ride. Each track is brought to life through a perfect mix of physical set pieces, screens, and projection mapping. I know it may not look as great in the POVs, but on the ride itself, everything blends together perfectly. The one flaw of this ride, though, is the augmented reality aspect. In case you didn't know, on this ride, you're given a pair of AR glasses to wear throughout the attraction. This is basically a sheet of glass with digital images projected on top. Those images consist of your teammates on the Mario team and your enemies on the Bowser team. The AR itself works fine enough, although there can be some wonkiness when it comes to interacting with the physical world. However, for me, this layer of the ride felt more like a distraction than anything else. I found myself enjoying the ride far more when I looked around at the environment around me rather than playing the actual game. The game itself is a bit flawed as well, with the lack of unlimited ammo meaning you're often just sitting around waiting for the next round of green shells. All of that may make it seem confusing why this holds the top spot on this list. That's because, for me, Universal was able to perfectly recreate the world of Mario Kart in real life. Whether it was exploring the twisted halls of Luigi's mansion or battling a giant stone Bowser within his castle, it truly feels like this ride is a video game made real. Seeing Rainbow Road come to life legitimately made me a bit emotional by the end. Again, I'm certainly a bit biased here, especially considering just how new this ride is. The flaws may become more apparent as time goes on, but for right now, I truly do believe that this is the best ride at Universal Studios Hollywood. Be sure to tell me your thoughts on this list in the comments down below. While you're there, check out my other theme park rankings and subscribe to catch the next one when it drops. Also, if you want to support the channel, hit the join button to get exclusive perks, like the ability to see certain videos early. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.